how can you claim ownership of a gene that occurs in nature, in human bodies that you didn't create? Well, that's the question before the courts. We could have debated here for a long, long time and maybe never resolved it. But depending on how the courts come out on this issue, we may visit it again. I hope the House is going to take this up quickly. I know that they want to look it over from their perspective, but we need to pass this. If we're talking about creating jobs and successful, thriving businesses in America, this bill needs to pass. Thanks, Chairman Leahy, for your leadership and for the hard work on this issue. Honored to serve with you on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I yield the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thank the distinguished senior senator from Illinois, and
the senator from Vermont.
And I thank the distinguished senior senator from Illinois, who's been an invaluable member of the Judiciary Committee all the time I've been there, and it's very, very, very helpful. I appreciate what he said. I found interesting the list of patents from his home state of Illinois, and I think each one of us can point some with pride. But if we're going to stay competitive with the rest of the world, we've got to get this bill passed. It's been 50 to 60 years since we've updated our patent law, and we are way behind the rest of the world. We have to be able to compete. So I thank the senator. And Madam President, and I've cleared this with the senator from Iowa, I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding the adoption of the Leahy-Grassley Amendment number 121, as modified, I ask that the amendment be modified further with the changes that are at the desk.
Without objection.
I thank the chair. Madam President, we're down to very few things. I hate to put in another quorum call and then hear from Senator Scully. I wanted some time to speak about amendments, but and I know that sometimes we follow the Dracula rule here, that being that we don't legislate until it's dark and Dracula comes out, but maybe we could, the days are getting longer, maybe we could do some things during daytime hours. So I send out a call, a pleading call. People really want their amendments, come forward. Let's have a vote up or down on them, and be done with this. And with that, Madam President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate continues in a quorum call. The pending business is the patent overhaul bill. Earlier, California's two senators expressing their opposition to the bill. Senator Feinstein of California became one of the first to speak out against the Patent Reform Act. She argued, according to The Hill, that a central provision would pollute California's fertile environment for startup companies. She took issue with the provision that would change the nation's first-to-invent system to a first-to-file system. The Hill writes that Senator Barbara Boxer has also expressed her dislike for the first-to-file provision in the Patent Reform Act. Earlier today, the Senate had passed the continuing resolution. A bill passed in the House yesterday, passed the Senate today 91-9, funding the federal government for fiscal year 2011, at least for the next 2 weeks through Friday, March the 18th. And that now goes to the President. Over in the U.S. House today, they have approved the reauthorization of transportation spending at least through the end of this fiscal year. That passed by a vote of 421-4, and they have moved on to debate on a bill that eliminates IRS reporting requirements for companies or people who own rental properties. This is part of the 1099 debate, the reporting on the 1099 according to the healthcare law that was passed. And that debate continues in the U.S. House. You can follow that on C-SPAN.
Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to end the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise in strong support of the Lee Amendment, which is a sense of the Senate that this body and the House should pass a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget. Madam President, clearly, I think in every American's mind, our top domestic challenge is to get hold of our fiscal situation, to move us to a sustainable path, to tighten our belt in the federal government, just like every American family has been doing for many years in this recession. We're making a start, a real but modest start, in terms of this year's budget. And I was happy that the Senate followed the lead of the House and passed a 2-week CR today that has substantial cuts, the exact level of cuts as the House passed for the rest of the fiscal year. I support that important start in terms of this year's budget. And of course, we need to finish the job by passing a spending bill for the entire rest of the fiscal year with that level of cuts or more. And that's a start, but it's only a start. The other thing I think we need to do, Madam President, is create, reform a structure that demands that Congress stay on that path to a balanced budget until we get there. And I believe the most important thing we can create to demand that, a straitjacket for Congress, if you will, is a balanced budget constitutional amendment. And unfortunately, Madam President, I think Congress time and time again over years and decades has proved that we need to put Congress in that straitjacket if we're going to ever get to a sustainable fiscal situation, a balanced budget. Madam President, this isn't some academic debate. This is about the future of our kids, our grandkids, and our immediate future, because we could be put into economic chaos at any time because of our untenable fiscal situation, because 40 cents of every dollar the federal government is spending is using borrowed money, and so much of that money borrowed from the Chinese. This is about whether we're going to remain the freest, most prosperous country in human history. And this is about if we're going to remain our own masters, or if we're going to have to look to the folks who are lending us all this money, including the Chinese, for consent in terms could lead to an immediate economic crisis unless we get ourselves on the path to a balanced budget quickly. Again, step one is cuts this year, a budget that is going back to 2008 levels, pre-stimulus, pre-Obama budgets this year. That's step one. But step two is some sort of important structural reform like a balanced budget constitutional amendment that puts a straitjacket on Congress, that demands that we get there in a reasonable period of time. Madam President, the huge majority of states operate under exactly this type of constitutional amendment. The huge majority of municipalities, towns, cities, other jurisdictions operate under this sort of constraint. And it's hard sometimes. It demands tough choices. In times like these, in a recession, it demands real cuts. But guess what, Madam President? Just like a family does, sitting around their kitchen table, making their family budget fit reality, states do that, cities do that, towns do that, and Congress should have to do that for the federal government. Congress should have to tighten its belt just like families do, reacting to their budget reality, sitting around the kitchen table. And I think it's perfectly clear we're not going to get there unless and until we're made to through some sort of mechanism like the balanced budget constitutional amendment. And, Madam President, even beyond the deadlines imposed by the expiration of the current or any other CR spending bill, we have another looming deadline, which is whenever the United States federal government hits up on the current debt ceiling. That's going to happen sometime between late March and May is the projection. And, Madam President, I firmly believe it would be enormously irresponsible to address that issue until and unless we put ourselves on this road to reform, until and unless we pass something like a meaningful balanced budget constitutional amendment. So this sense of the Senate is meant as a first step, and I applaud Senator Lee for putting it before us as that first step. Let's say yes. Let's say we're going to do it. And then, of course, most importantly, Madam President, let's do it. And let's do it now. The clock is ticking. Let's do it now, well before we reach any crisis point like coming up on the debt limit I spoke about. Let's act responsibly, which means acting now. Let's take up the nation's important business, which is spending and debt. And let's avoid the economic calamity that really is threatened if we stay on the path we're on, which is completely, utterly unsustainable. It's not just me saying that. It's everybody knowing it, including Ben Bernanke, Chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. He testified before us on the Banking Committee yesterday, said exactly the same thing. Ben Bernanke is not some ideologue. He's not some Tea Party conservative. But he said yesterday very clearly three important things. First of all, the greatest medium and long-term challenge we face as a country is our fiscal posture. Secondly, the fiscal path we're on is completely and utterly unsustainable. And third, while that is a long-term challenge, it poses short-term, immediate consequences. And if we don't get on a sustainable path now, immediately in the short term, we could have immediate short-term consequences, even economic crisis. Let's avoid that. Let's do right by our children. Let's tighten our belt like American families have been for several years in this recession. And let's demand that we keep on that path with a balanced budget constitutional amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The distinguished senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent that an article written for The Hill by distinguished Secretary of Commerce Gary Locke, dated March 2nd this year, be included in the record.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, it's interesting. I don't want to embarrass the person I want to speak about it all, but I was interested in listening to my dear friend Senator Durbin speak about his time at Georgetown Law School. Both he and I are graduated from the Georgetown Law School. He talked about a classmate of his who was in patent law, and he realized this was a complex subject, one that was not the sort of law that Senator Durbin was going to go into any more than I would have. But I also think of another graduate of Georgetown Law Center who, an engineer, had a degree in engineering, studied patent law, became one of the most distinguished patent lawyers, litigators in this country, and is now a member of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. That's Judge Richard Lynn. And what is interesting, hearing the senator from Illinois, distinguished senator from Illinois himself, one of the finest lawyers in this body, my wife Marcella and I had the honor of being out in Chicago with Judge Lynn and his wife Patty for a meeting of the Richard Lynn Inn of Court in Chicago. He serves with great distinction. In fact, a major part of this legislation reflects what an opinion he wrote. But I digress, Mr. President, and I ask unanimous consent the Senate resume consideration of the Lee Amendment number 115, the time until 5:15 be equally divided between the two leaders and their designees, that upon the use or yielding back of time, the Senate proceed to vote in relation to the Lee Amendment number 115. The Lee Amendment be subject to a 60-vote threshold. Upon disposition of the Lee Amendment, the Senate resume consideration of the Menendez Amendment number 124, that Senator Menendez be recognized to modify his amendment. With the change there at the desk and the amendment is modified, be agreed to that the motion to reconsider be considered made, laid upon the table, with no intervening action and debate, and there be no amendments in order to the amendments prior to the votes.
Is there objection? Without objection, it is so ordered.
And I thank the staff, the very superb staff, for writing that out, because I'm not quite sure I could have done it on my own. But I had hoped as we began debating this important bill to modernize America's patent system that the Senate would focus specifically on this measure designed to help create jobs. I had hoped that we would consider relevant amendments and pass the bill. You know, we can help unleash innovation. We can promote American invention. We can create jobs. We would not add a penny to the deficit. This is common sense, bipartisan legislation. You have Republicans and Democrats across the political spectrum as co-sponsors, and I would hope that we'd come together, pass this needed legislation, do it in the finest tradition of the Senate, something that we can do when we reflect our role that we're supposed to have as the conscience of the nation. But unfortunately, we've been bogged down with non-germane, non-relevant, extraneous discussions and amendments. Earlier this week, senators are focused on our legislative efforts and responsibilities, joined in tabling an amendment that had nothing to do with the American Invents Act. Extraneous amendments have nothing to do with the important issue of reforming our out-of-date patent system so that American innovators can win the global competition for the future. They have no place in this important bill. If we're going to win our global economic competition, we need to pass a bill that makes sense. Now we have to dispose of another such amendment. I take proposals to amend the Constitution of the United States seriously. I take seriously my oath as a senator to uphold and defend the Constitution and bear truth and allegiance to it, true faith and allegiance to it. Now, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of constitutional amendments proposed during my 37 years in the Senate. I'm delighted they did not pass. We can only imagine what our Constitution would look like if they had. And I've become more and more skeptical of recent efforts to amend the design that established the fundamental liberties and protections of all Americans. I think the founders of this country did a pretty good job in designing our fundamental charter. I take seriously the standards set in Article 5 of the Constitution. The Congress proposed amendments only when a supermajority of the Congress deem it necessary. I have all those hundreds and hundreds of constitutional amendments I have seen, a number actually voted on during the last 20 years. I've remained steadfast in my defense of the Constitution. Now, the so-called balanced budget amendment, I understand it's not new. I think it was the first matter Senator Hatch moved through the Judiciary Committee when he chaired it. I was ranking member. I opposed the constitutional amendment, but I worked with him to at least bring it to the floor so we could vote on it. And I wish others would show the managers of this bill the courtesy and cooperation, not seek to use the bill as a vehicle. I know that President Reagan spoke strongly about wanting a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. He never actually supported one, but he said he wanted one. Maybe the reason he didn't support a specific one is that he tripled the national debt while he was president and vetoed only one spending bill. Why? He didn't spend as much money as he wanted. Now, We've had the so-called balanced budget amendment 9 times before the committee. We debated amendments several times in 1982, 86, 92, 94, 95, 97. But they haven't been adopted. We agreed to it once in 92, but the House of Representatives thought better of it. Now, another senator has adopted the cause. He's proposed a different, even more complicated proposed constitutional amendment. Well, then let's study it. Let's send it where, let's follow the regular order. Send it to the Judiciary Committee, Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights. The senator who was proposed is a member of that subcommittee. He didn't speak to the chairman of it, he didn't speak to me, but preemptively sought to raise the matter in this important bill, which is designed to create jobs, encourage American innovation, strengthen our economy. You know, some of us have actually done hard work to produce a balanced budget. We didn't need to change the Constitution. I remember in 1993, not a single Republican voted to balance the budget. Not a single Republican. We passed it in this body by a 1-vote margin. I was proud to be here to vote for it. And what happened? We passed a budget that led to a balanced budget. In fact, a budget surplus of hundreds of billions of dollars. By the end of the Clinton administration, we were paying down the national debt. We had a surplus. Again, not a single Republican voted for it. But then the next administration squandered it by going into an unnecessary war and borrowing the money to do it. I'd ask particular letters to be placed in the record, and the balance of my speech is though read. And I note that we are now at 5:15.
Under the previous order, all time has now expired, and the question is on the Lee amendment.
Mr. President, even though I oppose this amendment and could simply allow it to go to a voice vote because the proponent of the amendment isn't even on the floor, I will, though, to protect his rights and notwithstanding his not following the normal policy on this, I would ask for the ayes and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be a sufficient second. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Ayotte, Burr, Cochran, Collins, DeMint, Graham, Grassley, Inhofe, Lugar, Manchin, McCain, Moran, Roberts, Toomey, Vitter. Mr. Hatch? Aye. Senators voting in the negative: Blumenthal, Casey, Coons, Franken, Leahy, Reed of Nevada, Sanders, Tester, Webb, Whitehouse. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Hoeven, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Inouye, no. Mrs. Murray, no. Mrs. Hutchison, aye. Ms. Mikulski, no. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Lautenberg. No. Mr. Johans. Aye. Mrs. Hagan. No. Mr. Coburn. Aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune. Aye. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman. No. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand. No. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch. Aye. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin. No. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. No. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates. Aye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Isaacson. Aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso. Aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn. Aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul. Aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions. Aye. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez. No. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka. No. Ms. Snow. Ms. Snow. Aye. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey. No. Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kirk. Aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner. No. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio. Aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow. No. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi. Aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker. Aye. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander. Aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin. No. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby. Aye. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss. Aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley. No. Mr. Ensign. Mr. Ensign. Aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski. Aye. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor. No. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill. Aye. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman. Aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein. No. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin. No. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. No. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman. Aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus. No. Mr. Kyle. Mr. Kyle. Aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden. No. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller. No. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell. Aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer. No. Mrs. Boxer, Mrs. Boxer, no. Mr. Begich, Mr. Begich, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye.